Quite a while ago, Andrew, a long-term supporter and regular viewer of my scripts, asked the question if the German alliance with Italy was actually worth it. This got me thinking, since the common narrative is basically that the Italians performed very poorly on the battlefield, which is an oversimplification. Yet in order to answer the original question, we actually must go beyond the battlefield and also before the Second World War itself, since this answer can't be really tackled with a look at battles at all, in my opinion. So let us look at the map of Europe at around summer 1939. As you can see, by this time Austria is gone, Czechoslovakia is gone as well. Instead there's Bohemia, which is part of the German Reich, and Slovakia, which is basically a German puppet. We also see the major European powers, the United Kingdom, France, Germany and Italy. This is very important because if Italy had not sided with Germany, it is very unlikely that Germany could have annexed Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia. For much of the early 1930s, Mussolini and his foreign policy advisors deeply distrusted Hitler's geopolitical ambitions, notably his unconcealed aim to incorporate the German-Austrian rump state created by the Treaty of Saint-Germain into the Greater German Reich. More worryingly, the Deutsche suspected that Hitler's ambition to swallow up all of ethnic German minorities currently living under foreign rule wouldn't stop at Italy's borders, which contained the predominantly German-speaking population of Alto Adige, South Tyrol. So before Hitler and Mussolini cooperated, Austrian independence to a certain degree was guaranteed by Italy. Yet due to Hitler supporting Italy's invasion of Ethiopia and both Italy and Germany cooperating in the Spanish Civil War, both countries grew closer together. Of course, similar enemies and various other factors had also an influence. As such, Italy was crucial for the German expansion before the war. To quote John Gooch, after announcing the creation of the Italo-German Axis on 1st November 1936 and standing by while Hitler occupied Austria in March 1938, Mussolini played his part in the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia at Munich in September 1938 by loyally reading from a script written by Hitler. Of course, one might ask how important these expansions actually were. Good question. So let us look at the economic, military and other aspects that these pre-war German expansions had for Germany. First, let us look at the annexation of Austria in March 1938. This is the so-called Anschluss, of which I did a video a while ago. Although Austria was a minor state and in 1919 was seen even by most Austrians as a country that could not survive on its own, it was quite resourceful in various ways. In the agricultural sector, the country produced milk, butter and cheese in excess of its own needs, and at first glance was able to help to fill the corresponding gaps in Germany. In terms of raw materials, it had in particular timber, iron ores, lead, zinc ores and water resources unused for energy production. Austrian oil deposits were not left unnoticed. On top of that, Austria has strong raw material and processing industry, which had unused capacities due to the recession. Additionally, Austria also had 400,000 unemployed, most of whom were skilled workers. As such, this increased the German labor reserves by 30 to 40%. The integration of the Austrian economy was a key aspect of the Anschluss. Only 2 days after the occupation, the 4-year plan for Austria was approved. To give you some numbers for iron ore and oil, in 1937 Austria produced 1.8 million metric tons of iron ore, in 1939 2.9 million, so an increase by 58%. For oil it went from a mere 32,900 metric tons to 144,000, which is an increase of 339%, and according to the historian Adam Tooze, some of that iron ore was highest grade. At the same time, the Herrenn-Göring-Werk extended its influence to Austria by building a gigantic metallurgical plant in Linz and taking control of numerous existing industrial enterprises. With the Gustloff Foundation, another state-owned corporation gained a foothold in the Alpine region, which, along with IG Farben AG, controlled large areas of the chemical powder production. Under these conditions, the involvement of Austrian industry in the immediate rearmament process took place quickly and almost smoothly. Still, these expansions were not enough to use up all the unemployed in Austria, and there was still a lack of skilled workers in Germany, although there were monetary incentives to get Austrian workers to Germany. it did not work. As such, a decree was passed that allowed the transfer of 100,000 Austrian workers, including 10,000 engineers, to Germany. Tooze notes, the Anschluss added somewhat less than 8% to Germany's existing industrial output. Yet there is more. In terms of finances, altogether, the Austrians' foreign exchange dowry came to at least 878 million Reichsmark, more than doubling Germany's reserves. These funds were crucial because in the first weeks of 1938, Germany's balance of payment situation looked extremely bleak. Instead, thanks to the Austrian booty, Germany in 1938 was able to run a trade deficit of almost 450 million Reichsmarks, larger than any time since 1929. For a brief moment at least, the Anschluss freed Hitler's regime from the balance of payments constraints. In the long run, the Anschluss was a negative according to Tooze and other sources, since Austria also depended on imports. As such, the Anschluss strengthened Germany in the short run, yet the Reich still required a further expansion of territory and resources. The Anschluss had further economic and diplomatic influence, since the share of German imports from countries like Hungary and Yugoslavia rose from 26 to 44 and 32 to 43%. Furthermore, over the months that followed, Germany was able to use its enhanced leverage to conclude new trade treaties with both Hungary and Poland. Additionally, geostrategically, Czechoslovakia was now basically surrounded by Germany. Similarly, Germany had now new borders with Italy, Hungary and Yugoslavia. Of course, we also need to address the direct military benefits the Anschluss allowed for. In addition to this increase in experience, the incorporation of Austrian armed forces brought a not considerable strengthening of the army. Thus, in the course of 1938, a total of 2 infantry divisions, 2 mountain divisions, 1 armored division and 1 light armored division were newly formed. About 60,000 Austrian soldiers were transferred to the Wehrmacht. Of the approximately 3,100 Austrian officers, about 1,600 were still accepted into the German officer corps. One can argue that Hitler might have pushed into Austria without the consent of Italy, but that would mean that there was no support from any other major power in Europe at the time. We know that the Italian forces were not particularly combat effective, but this was less known back then. Also consider that at this point the Italian military had far more combat experience to the war in Ethiopia and the Spanish Civil War. Germany also intervened in the later, but from the number of troops involved to a far smaller extent. Now let us look at Czechoslovakia next. Czechoslovakia was basically killed off in several steps. First, the annexation of the Sudetenland in September 1938 with the Munich Agreement. Then the Vienna Award, in which parts were lost to Hungary and Poland occupied some other parts. Finally, in March 1939, there was the German occupation and the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, which led to the creation of a Slovak puppet state. The Czech industry was substantial. The Czechs' armament industry was well established and of high quality. In 1937, Czechoslovakia was the 4th largest arm exporter in the world. The most notable companies were the Skoda Works, famous for the Panzer 38T, and the Weapons Work in Brno, famous for the Bren light machine gun. Yet the industries came with a special perk as well. At the same time, more than 200,000 technical drawings and patents fell into German hands, some of which were essential for the Wehrmacht and the armaments industry, since Czechoslovakia had a highly developed and extensive armaments industry. In terms of resources, there were stocks of copper, nickel, lead, aluminium, zinc and tin. Furthermore, in the raw material sector, the new territory had a surplus of timber and rich deposits of tungsten and uranium ores, which Germany did not have. These could be used in the armaments industry. In addition, there were high quality brown coal deposits which, to the extent that they were not in the Sudeten German possessions, became state property. In terms of quality and volume, they allowed a strong expansion of mineral oil, Buna, which is synthetic rubber, general chemical production and the energy industry. In the agricultural sector, the numbers were good. Overall, the area was self-sufficient. When it came to the labor force, about 108,000 unemployed workers were added to the labor pool of the Reich. Also within the framework of the Armaments Rearmament Program of August 1936, the high-quality armaments found on Czechoslovak territory, weapons, ammunition and equipment were a most welcome addition. The loot described in detail by Hitler in his speech of April 28, 1939, before the Reichstag, contributed to achievement of one of the goals of the August program, the precautionary stockpiling of weapons and equipment for 15 infantry divisions, the equipment divisions. So in short, the annexation of Austria and Czechia provided the German Reich with substantial resources, industries, money, military equipment and manpower. In terms of divisions alone, one must account for about 20 divisions. Considering that Germany started the war with 103 divisions, this is a substantial amount. If these annexations would have been possible without the approval or outright support of Italy, I don't know, yet I have serious doubts about that. The amount of potential allies for Germany was severely limited, especially among the major powers. Yes, Italy was the weakest of the major powers, but it was still a major power. Additionally, it had a sizable and modern fleet, something that is often forgotten. So at least for the pre-war situation, an alliance with Italy was crucial, if not outright essential, for Germany. Of course, the question is if Italy was still crucial for Germany once the war started, especially considering that at first Italy did not join the fighting, but took a stance of non-belligerence. So, would Germany have benefited from a friendly yet not fighting Italy, similar to the stance Spain took? More than they benefited from a fighting Italy? Well, that is likely far more complicated. So I hope you learned something new. Thank you to Andrew for submitting the question and reviewing the script. Thanks to my Patreon subscribers and supporters for financing trips to museum and archives. Thank you for watching and see you next time.